Good afternoon. My name is Dwight Jr. I'm with Dun & Bradstreet, and I am here today to talk to you about customer engagement. Now we have business transformation, and we have operational excellence. And then we have customer engagement. How do those three disciplines relate, or do they relate at all? Both good questions. And if you think about it, really, a business is really a group of activities, right? Take some inputs, add a little value, create some outputs for the end user, the customer, for profit. That's kind of important, right? And if you can do that repeatedly, well, you've got yourself a business. But how do you know that you've created value? How do you know that you've created real, long-term, sustainable customer value? Oh, is it because someone paid for it? Okay. But what if you were just fortunate enough to find that niche of people that maybe were willing and able to pay for your product or service? And sure, that might sustain your business for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, maybe even a year, if you're lucky. But what about the kind of value that will sustain your business for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, or if you're fortunate enough, a generation? How do you create that kind of sustainable customer value? It may come as a shock to you, but there's someone out there, I guarantee you, that's going to start their business tomorrow and not truly understand what the customer values. And there are companies out there that have no real idea of what the customer values. Now, if you ask that person who's going to start that business, they tell you, hey, we know what the customer values because, well, if we were the customer, that's what we'd want. Okay, but you're not the customer. Pow, right? So why the talk about customer engagement? Well, because without the proper customer engagement, you can't deliver operational excellence. Customer engagement is the prerequisite for operating at an excellent level. You can't have one without the other. So think of customer engagement as the quintessential prerequisite for operating excellently. Now, the tools and the methodology that we're going to be reviewing here today will actually empower you, will empower you with understanding how to prioritize in those projects, how you deliver customer engagement. And even more importantly, it will also empower your organization with how to prioritize those strategic business objectives on an annualized basis, which will allow you to run your companies more efficiently. All right? Let's begin. The first item, what's really important to engage the customer, we have to find out what's important to the customer. I know it sounds really basic, but it's true. We have to, priority number one, prerequisite number one, what's important to the customer. How do you do that? Well, big secret, folks. Prepare for the big secret. Here it comes. You have to ask the customer. It may come as a shock. I guarantee you there are firms out there today that are trying to skirt this very issue, but you can't. You have to actually have some sort of means to capture the voice of the customer. There is no substitute. I wish I could tell you there was a magic bullet, a panacea. There is none. You have to ask the customer. Now, what you're looking at is called a critical to quality tree. Has anyone seen this before? All right. It's one of my favorite tools. I'm going to walk you through how this works. To the left, we have what's critical. Typically, when you're utilizing a critical to quality tree, you're going to come up with 3 to the 5 of the things that customers are telling you are the most important. Customers are letting you know, hey, these are the things that we deem are the most important. As you move from left to right, you're going to obtain a list of customer wants. As you move even further, how do you know you're finished with this amazing tool? Well, when you have a list of measures that will inform you as to what's critical, then you know you have finished the critical to quality tree. Now, we're going to go through an example. So, once upon a time in a galaxy far, far, far away, I worked at an investment bank in Manhattan. And so we're going to use the banking industry. So we found out, we asked customers, what's important in the banking industry? Customers said, hey, availability, that's really important to us. Okay, availability, great. What else? Economical. They want something that is economical. Makes sense? Sounds fair? Okay. They wanted full service. Full service. Okay, that's the third piece that's really important to customers. This is critical. And then finally, concierge. Concierge service, believe it or not, is something that's really important to customers. And we know this because it came from where? It came from the voice of the customer. Wasn't us trying to guess, wasn't us trying to figure it out, wasn't us talking to someone else. We talked to the customer. All right, so then what did we do? Well, I said, okay, well, these are our 4 critical components that the customer has identified as the most critical. Now what? How does that, what do we do to get us there? Well, they say that after our support fits the bill and will deliver availability. Notice that every time I'm going through this, I'm talking about what the customer has identified. They said also, hey, flexible business hours. That will, for us, mean availability. I'll go through this a little faster. Cost was an important consideration for delivering on the economical aspects of things. And then also time. No one wants to waste or spend quite a bit of time. So economical for the customer, what's critical is there's a time component. Full service, what does that mean? It means they were looking for travel. They want to be able to maybe make air accommodations, car rentals from their bank. Hey, this comes from the voice of the customer, so we can't scoff. That's what they say they want. And then also accommodations, okay? Concierge, they want to be able to have special arrangements at their bank. If you're paying for a full service bank, this is what they want. And then finally, they said, hey, look, we'd like to have an actual concierge person, someone who can actually deliver these things that are important to us. Okay, great. Well, what's the next step? Well, the next step is you try to come up with a list of the how. How do you deliver these various things? Now, again, we're moving from left to right, so we're moving from this area over here, and we're moving from left to right. So the how piece, this is where certainly if you have some input from the customer, you incorporate that. But this is where your mid to senior level executives, bless you, are actually coming up with, hey, this is how we can deliver these items that the customer has identified as are critical for them. So what does that look like? Okay, well, we can give them 24/7 customer support as a company, as a bank. Great. What else can we do? We can have operator assistance. Okay, sounds fair, makes a lot of sense. We can have more storefront locations and we can have no client fees. Okay. We can have a manager frequent flyer travel program. Doesn't sound overly complicated, doesn't sound like it'll be too costly, but that's what we as a company can deliver. We can also have managers and we can have personal provider lists. And that personal provider list can provide a service in terms of making an accommodations. And then finally, the last two, we can make entertainment reservations. If that's what clients want, we can do that. And we can also have a medical assistance person on site. I mean, if you're older and you're relying on banking, maybe your concern is, what if I leave the house, I'm at the bank, and something happens to me? Well, this is a way for us to deliver something that you might not have necessarily figured out on your own. But again, this is how we are delivering a higher level of service. Now, how do we measure? The really important part of this tool is coming up with the measures. We can measure 24/7 customer support by the number of customer touches. Okay? We can also look at the percent of wait times less than 3 minutes. I mean, if availability is what's critical, and we've gone through these machinations to try to make sure that we deliver that, shouldn't the percent of wait times less than 3 minutes be a really good reflection as to whether or not we're delivering upon that promise? It should be, absolutely. The number of locations within 10 miles. If economical cost and time is really important, then certainly that's a great indicator as to whether or not we're delivering that. And then also fee revenue. Well, if the goal is to have no client fees and make it non-economical, well, guess what? Having no client fees, having no fee revenue is a great reflection because it's taking us and it's reflecting that we are prioritizing what's important to the customer. The number of program inquiries each month. again, an indicator of interest, reflects as to the value that we're delivering, and then also the number of people on a preferred list that are returning each year. That's giving us also the value as to, are people finding that this is something that they are actually wanting to continuously engage in. Then the final two is the number of entertainment reservations made a month, and then also the number of employees trained with medical assistance. So if customers say that they like having a medical assistance person on site, well, guess what? The number of employees that you've trained that have some sort of medical background, that dual skill set, the number of people that you have working in your banks, that's a great reflection as to how you're prioritizing that for the customers. Now, how many have seen this? Okay, just one. I thought it'd be a little bit less. It's the quality function deployment. It's also known as the house of quality. This is an extraordinarily important, and it's really an oft-used tool in Lean Six Sigma, but it is extraordinarily powerful. You don't see a whole lot of people use it because, quite honestly, there's a lot to it. But I'm gonna, and you know that to be true. But I'm about to get into it, and you're gonna see just how important this tool is. If you look at the tool, it has 8 pieces. Oops, excuse me. The tool has 8 pieces. And those 8 pieces, first we have our customer requirements. Then we have, second, importance via. I'll get into that in a moment. We have our hows, our relationship matrix, which we'll get into. We have our competitor ratings, our action, our notes. Then we have our rankings on the hows, and then we have our correlation matrix. There are 8 components to this, all uniquely powerful. We'll jump into them in just a moment.
What's number 8? You want to say something?
Sure. Number 8 is the correlation matrix. Yeah. And I'll get into the correlation matrix last. This is all, again, it's all pretty powerful. Even if someone is and has familiarity with Lean Six Sigma, this is not something that the typical practitioner would utilize. So hopefully this will be something that kind of sheds light on the topic. This is the base. This is what it looks like, the house of quality. You've got various pieces, and we're going to get right into it. You start with asking what's important to the customer. Now, here's what's really neat. We've got all these things: availability, economical, full service, concierge. Guess what, folks? Where did all that stuff come from? It came from our critical to quality tree. It should look familiar, and that's the reason why. So we start, again, what is important to the customer? Then what we do is we say, okay, well, you input the customer wants. And if that looks familiar, it should also look familiar. It comes from our critical to quality tree. Is everyone with me? Okay. We list them. Okay? Now, super important, of course, to understand and ask your customers what's important. That is absolutely quintessentially important. But ladies and gentlemen, the secret sauce to making this whole thing work is not enough to just ask customers what's important. You have to have them rank it. You have to have them rank what's important. How else are you going to know what the most important thing is if you don't ask them to rank it? Does that make sense? In the critical to quality tree, this is where you import customer rankings. And again, this all comes from the customer. I must let you know that when you utilize this, it's important to know you have to put them in reverse order. So, in the critical to quality tree, if you have a ranking first of importance to say 8, you have to reverse that order if you're going to use this tool. That is the only trick to using this tool. What's most important gets an 8. What's least important, relatively, gets a 1. All right? Now, what we're doing is we're ranking the customer wants, and we're ranking them according to the voice of the customer. How do we engage the customer? If this looks familiar, it should. These are all the things that came from our critical to quality tree. That goes up here. Okay? Is everyone still with me so far? All right. Now, we're going to develop what's called a correlation key. And I don't want to scare anyone with this. It's not complicated. The correlation key asks an important question. It says, okay, look, if something we're going to ask ourselves, what is the relationship between a box here and a box coming here? So for example, what is the relationship between after-hour support and 24/7 website support? It's a pretty high correlation. You have a key down here that says, look, if it's a strong positive, or if it's a medium correlation, or weak, or no correlation, we're going to have 3, you can use however many categories you like. For simplicity and for what works, we're utilizing 3. High correlation, medium correlation, low correlation. Mathematically, that high is going to translate to a 9. The medium would translate into a 3, and the low would translate into a 1. Is everyone with me?
Dwight, how many different choices have you seen in that table before?
You know what? I've only used the one. This is, like I said, this tool is used very infrequently. There's a lot behind this, so you don't see it used. I've actually used it quite successfully. So to be honest with you, I've never seen anyone else use it, but I'm hoping that through the conversation and through this exercise, folks will feel empowered to use it, because it's an extraordinarily important and useful tool. So this is how I use the tool. This is how I've used the tool. Now the question again is, for each of these boxes, you're asking the question, what is the correlation between, say for example, time and medical assistance? It's a pretty low correlation. Here's what's really important, folks. It's not that these answers require some sort of perfect resolution. What's important here is that you're in a room with mid to senior level leaders, and you're obtaining a consensus. When I did this at Dun & Bradstreet, I had subject matter experts in the room, fellow leaders, and we went through this. And at the end of it, we had consensus. Consensus meaning that no one should walk out saying, well, gosh darn it, you were just wrong. That's not what this is about. This is a team building exercise, but it's really important that you come up with this, and I'll explain the reason why in a little bit later. Again, how much does after-hour support relate to 24/7 customer support? There's a very high correlation. How much does storefront locations relate to economical time? There's really, right here it's low. You go through this exercise, you develop a consensus amongst your team. Now, this you can also do, and this is also highly valuable. You can also, through this exercise, capture where does our company stand relative to our competitors. So for example, for after-hour support, you ask your clients in the voice of the customer, hey, how do we stand? Are we best? If not, who is? Are we the worst? If not, who is? Where are we? Are we in the middle? You have a competitor key. Again, this is not heavy lifting, folks, but you can understand how this can be extraordinarily valuable in terms of a tool, because you're capturing not only information about your company, but also now you're starting to understand where you sit in the industry landscape. Now, a lot of numbers. I hope that there are some people that aren't afraid to see these numbers, but let me just explain to you where these numbers come from, because it's not really too complicated. We said, for example, that the relationship between after-hour support and 24/7 website support, we said that was a high correlation, right? Highs were worth 9, remember? That 9 times that 7 is 63. Here, we said the flexible business hours, it must have been a high. It must have been flexible business hours. The correlation between flexible business hours and 24/7 website support, it must have been a high, because it was 9, and we know that 9 times 2 is 18. Now, if we sum all of these things according to that, that gives us our relative weight. Is everyone with me? Now, if we decided, for example, that we did not want to multiply the customer importance, and we just used, like say that was a high, we just used a 9. If that was a high, we use that as a 9. That would be a 3, so I believe that was like a low. We could just use those numbers, and that would give us the absolute weights. Now listen, how you do this, you can use either the absolute weights or you can use the relative weights. There is no right or wrong answer in terms of which approach to utilize. I will tell you personally that whenever you can incorporate the voice of the customer, you should absolutely do so. So my preference would, of course, be to utilize the relative weight. The absolute and the relative weights allow us to rank our actions. This is how we engage the customers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how you prioritize the projects, the annualized projects, which is what you're going to make sure that you do looking at the following year. This is how we need to engage. These are the projects that we're going to use to engage for the upcoming year. This is how you set the priority. Does it make sense? It's mathematical. It takes into account not only the voice of the customer and what's important, but it also incorporates what the customer says is the most important. And again, I strongly encourage you to use relative weights. Now, I developed this in Excel. I have many multiple programs that I've created in Excel. You can do the very same thing. It's not overly complex or complicated. I've had some folks ask me, hey, could you kind of walk me through this offline? I have no problem with doing that, but hopefully you can start to understand the power of this tool, because your company just simply can't go wrong if you've prioritized accordingly. Now, this is the impact and the relationship analysis piece. And what's important here is oftentimes the companies in particular, they may decide, hey, you know, we've got these things we're going to do, and they start to do them. And even if you go through this exercise, if you just did that, chances are you'd be on the right path. But guess what? What do most companies fail to do? What most companies fail to do is to go through an analysis as to, hey, these new initiatives that we're thinking about employing and that we're agreeing that we're going to employ, how do they impact each other? At the highest levels, you really need to understand and have an appreciation as to, is one thing that you're going to doing, would it possibly have a negative impact on something else that you're doing, or maybe even something else that you already have planned to do? The top house of the the quality function deployment, which is called an impact and relationship analysis, the top of the house part of that asks that question. So for example, when you go through this, and I know that this is a busy diagram, but when you go through this, what you're doing is you are simply doing this. You are asking, how does 24/7 web support, how does that relate to no client fees? And you'll see here that there's a negative there. Well, why would there be a negative there? There'd be a negative there because, well, guess what? After hours support, 24/7 web support, that's going to increase our costs. Okay? And then no client fees, well, that decreases our revenues. And guess what? It's important to understand the relationship of things and initiatives that you're going to roll out on an annualized basis. This is what you do for your strategic business objectives as well. It's important to really understand what's the relationship, what's the impact of these various things. Think of it like a portfolio of projects, and you need to understand how they will interact with each other. How will they impact your organization overall? The top of the house does that. And what it allows you to do is, for example, operator assistance and medical assistance. Wow, they're two positives. It will allow you, when you have this, if you're going to be the CFO, or if you are going to have a relationship with the CFO, or if you're going to communicate to the CFO, or anyone who needs to know, you better be armed with this. This shows that you understand how these things will come together. It allows you to have higher level conversations, higher thoughts about how you're going to actually roll these things out. Make sense? All right, good. All right, well, listen. Quality function deployment translates customer wants into how we engage the customer. It prioritizes your corporate projects and initiatives. And it also allows us to measure our success in engaging the customer. Thank you very much. I'm free for questions. Don't everyone speak up at once.
In the last slide, how do you actually operationalize that with the quality function?
Okay, let me go back. This one here?
No, the next slide where you have what the quality function does, how does that actually move forward in practice?
This move forward in practice.
Yes.
Okay, good question. All right, so in practice, my top priority. So if someone says, "Hey, you can do 4 projects. Which 4 projects are we going to do according to this?" Number 1, mathematically, I'm going to institute operational assistance. Number 2, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to start an initiative where I say, hey, listen, we either need to train folks with maybe some basic CPR, or I talk to HR and say, hey, listen, here's what we need to do. When you're hiring folks to come into the bank from now on, anyone who has medical experience, we need to bring those people on board. Number 3, okay, what is this? 24/7 website support. That's my 3rd. Number 4, I need to make sure that I have personal preferred provider list, and I need to manage that. Now, what's wonderful about this is I've never ever seen any company say, oh, we have a limitless budget for your projects, right? You're never going to hear that. Well, you have a prioritization here. And that's why this is so incredibly important and powerful, because it's telling you what you need to do first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. It's not just scientific, it's all based on the customer. And guess what? Here's the beauty of it. It's all something that you can look back on 2, 3, 5 years from now. If someone audits you, I'm always concerned about, hey, what happens if another Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt comes behind me and he or she audits my work? I want to make sure that if that Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt comes behind me, they know they can look and say, oh, okay, yeah, that's what that person was doing. That's what they were considering. Okay, it's good. Right? That's what this does. And quite honestly, it's really difficult for someone to argue why you shouldn't be doing this if you have an approach such as this. And by the way, this is a repeatable approach. So you're really simplifying everything. It really is, it's all based on the customer. So extremely powerful. This piece here, which I didn't get into too much, but the piece here where you're actually capturing input from other companies, that's basically your SWOT right there. That's your SWOT analysis, and you can actually incorporate that into this tool. Now, you might have seen, I think we saw a number of hands talking about they've seen the critical to quality tree. That's great. But there was only one hand that had seen this, and chances are few hands have seen these two things linked together. But that's what these tools together, they unleash an enormous amount of power and a lot of direction in terms of what you need to focus on for the following year, for the following several years. Because guess what? Those things that you couldn't get to this year, maybe those are the things that are in your inventory of projects for the following year.
Speaking of that, before you went to the next projects, would you redo the voice of the customer to see if preferences have changed?
Great question. I absolutely would. Because we know that the voice of the customer changes over time. So you should have your company should have that feedback loop with a regular cadence of capturing the voice of the customer, so that when you are actually looking at this, maybe you're doing your annual process around October, November or so, you should be recalibrating these various things and weighing them, and really kind of quite honestly going through it again and making sure that you're updating with fresh information, with fresh preferences, with fresh critical issues. There was a question.
I was just going to say, since I'm the only one who's seen this from many years ago, we struggled with it because we could not figure out what was the relative ranking for the customers. A lot of customers don't know what they want, and I think we've learned that now from Apple and a lot of technology, that customers don't know what they want. You have to kind of figure it out in different means, and then when you get those lists, for them to be able to rank it, they want them all. They want everything. They do.
They do. What I would suggest you do, first of all, I don't know if you guys use SurveyMonkey. We are actually in the process on one of the projects that I'm managing. We're in the process of actually utilizing SurveyMonkey. What you can do as a proxy is you can measure the number of times that customers say they want something. So some people may give a list, and they may give that list and say, hey, tell us the things that are the most important, or put your top 3. You can do that. You can say, hey, fill in the blank as to what's important to you, and you can use a frequency distribution on that. There are a few things that you can do, but absolutely you got to figure out what works. Every industry, every customer group, every customer segment is going to be different. but you absolutely want to go through that effort. Once you find the one that works, stick with it, of course, but capturing that, it really is the secret sauce. There are a lot of, look, we all get these surveys, spend 5 minutes, answer some questions. It's all great. And you know what, that's a really important part of what you need to do to capture the voice of the customer. But taking it to the highest level requires you to spend a little bit of extra time, even if you have to sacrifice the number of questions. If you can only ask 3 or 4 questions but get the priority of that, so much more valuable.
So what else would you use along with the voice of customer in, I mean, are there other things that you guys did from your from a banking industry perspective, like a benefits program or something, like a loyalty benefits program or something, that sort of like, gave you a different picture when used in conjunction with, the data that you gathered out here?
Tough to answer your question because, again, I'm with Dun & Bradstreet and I'm using this as an example. Certainly I can't really talk about Dun & Bradstreet related activity. I probably didn't know we're actually being acquired for $52 billion, so that would be a no-no. But, to talk about that, but what I can say, so what I've done here is I took, since I was at Barclays before in Manhattan, I used this example as to kind of how you would use that in a banking environment. I really wanted to try to make sure that, for me, what's really important is empowering people with the tools to actually do things, as opposed to just talking about high-level things that people might find, oh, that sounds great, but how do I actually use this? Nobody knows. So I can't say, for example, with certainty, how Barclays would do this. I do know, and am joined in, I do know the person that's running the transformation at Barclays. We never had this level of conversation. She wasn't at that stage. So again, I can't really I can't really say from a banking perspective how this applies. But I can
tell you I forgot that you're in Dun & Bradstreet.
Sure,
the industry that from where you come from, like any example of like, we use this in conjunction with XYZ. It translates into something, and then the follow-up would be, after you've done implementing it, when you go back and try to repeat this exercise, would you learn something new or different?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I can answer the first question very easily. So the first question was, it was the team exercise. We all kind of learned from, okay, we're in the process of developing. So one of the projects that I managed a little while ago was developing a platform. And so we're actually in the process of developing the platform, and the things that we prioritize as to what's important all came from this. I brought folks in, and we just had that. That was the meeting for the day. I scheduled a series of meetings, and that was the objective for the day. Now, as we move forward, what we will do, and one of the key components of this is making sure that you have some sort of a feedback loop, some kind of a feedback mechanism to continually capture the voice of the customer with regular cadence, so that you can then compare that to, okay, well, this is where we were. But you have to start from somewhere.
Right.
And this is a great place to start. Again, you're asking your organization to spend money, you're saying, hey, this is how we should spend resources. There are a number of people that think, oh, lean is just about process, or lean is just about doing it efficiently. No, lean is about spending effort where effort is required. And that's exactly what this is. This is saying, look, we're going to spend our effort where we're going to get the biggest return on our investment dollar. There, then there, then there, then there. We'll let you figure out what the budget is, but this is the priority. And so that's the approach that I think we're using. Yeah.
Wait, that top pyramid, it didn't affect the weightings in any way. It
No.
seems to me that it ought to if you have two different competing things.
That is a really good point that you're making. You can incorporate that if you want to. I've never seen that, but look, there are a whole host of things you can do. Every industry is going to be different. That wasn't the way that it was taught to me, but I could absolutely see how somebody could say, you know what, I may want to tweak some things. I actually spoke with somebody when I had this before, and she was running the innovation initiative at ITW, and she had a great idea, which was you could incorporate what did she say? You can incorporate the things that turn customers off, and there are a whole host of things that you can do to make this prettier or sexier or fit it to your industry or how you're capturing information. My point today was I really wanted to kind of highlight some tools that are probably seldom used, combine them and show folks the link, and hopefully empower everyone in this room so that you can feel comfortable. You know what? I can do that. I can go back and I can actually import that, or I can do a little bit of research and I can do this. You can do it. It's manageable. And then, to your point, you can tweak it however you want to your organization, and it all makes sense. I think it will be a challenge because incorporating these things, right?
It becomes a Monte Carlo.
It can be, and then so what I would probably argue is that sometimes it's better to not be too cute, because if you try to specialize and you try to customize so much, then the more you customize, the more you run into differences of opinion as to how you customize. So it may be something you just have to be aware of. This is straightforward enough that you put this in front of someone and you walk them through it, and you pretty much diffuse a whole lot of stuff. You diffuse the ability for someone to say, no, I think that this is more important. Say, yeah, you may think that's more important, but guess what? Customer's saying this. Customer says that's number one. Customer says that's number two. Tough to argue with the customer if you are going to be a customer-centric organization. Make sense?
Would you recommend implementing this at kind of every level of the business? So sort of thinking at the C table, whatever, this is our strategy, these are our priorities across the whole piece, or at each individual kind of process level, because
I like
that's a lot of effort.
No, listen, I like the question. I'm a fan. Are you familiar with Hoshinkanri?
No.
All right, it's a Japanese term. It's fine. Hoshinkanri basically is a way of saying, look, we need to understand what is our business today, what is our business in the future, and what do we want to be, or what should we be? I think that's the place to start. I think that should be, that should determine your strategic business objectives. But I think this sits right under that. Mm-hmm. When you do a Hoshinkanri, basically each level of the organization has an agreement as to how they're going to deliver this. I think you use this tool as a means of quantifying what are the strategic business objectives that we have, and you use those two things together. Once you figure those things out in terms of what you're going to do, and you use this as a tool to kind of figure out, hey, what are the ones that are most important, then you cascade it down from one layer to the next. So for example, the VP says, hey, listen, leaders, you're all in a room. You're responsible for this, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for this. Well, this is the strategic business objective, and how are you going to deliver that? What are you going to own as a part of this? And that person says, okay, well, I think I can get this, I think I can, this measure, I think I can get it to this, I think I can get it to this. And then what does he do? He's going to go to his folks and say, hey, listen, this is what we're signed on. Who's going to deliver that? And then you each, it's a Japanese term, basically, and it's a Japanese way of going about it. But it's a very effective way of kind of cascading from one level to the next, how you actually deliver that lean deployment kind of a strategy. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Yeah.
You can, of course, if you want to do this, you can do it like in a decentralized method. The problem with that is that there's always a centralized budget normally. And that centralized budget, it's better to say, hey, everyone has to know what everyone else is doing. It seems like it would be a little bit problematic to do it in a decentralized fashion, if you ask me. But I love the question, thank you. Yes?
This is somewhat a related question in that, so I'm the only one doing continuous improvement, process innovation, process improvement, whatever, for my bank.
Yeah, okay.
And so the bank has several lines of business, and so each of those lines of business would consider that they have their customers, and each of their customers have different priorities.
Yeah, right.
Do you have thoughts on how to implement this? And I'm trying to figure out right now. I've been there for 5 months, and I'm somewhat overwhelmed with all the potential opportunity for improvement.
Right.
And where do I spend my time?
Yeah.
It seems I'm spending most of it on retail because that's our largest base of costs.
Right.
I mean, most of our people are at the branches and the cost of the facilities of the branches. So what do you think about doing that?
Yeah, no, I love it. So what I would suggest you do is this. The first thing any business has to do, if you're really, truly concerned about incorporating the voice of the customer into the fabric of what you're doing, you've got to develop that regular cadence of how are we capturing what's important to the customer? That has to be, that is so the prerequisite to anything. Once you do that, and I'm in the process right now, I think I mentioned it earlier, we're using SurveyMonkey on one of the projects that I'm managing. We're going to be reaching out to vendors and we're going to ask them, hey, you know, what do you think about our process? Did we have too many forms? What do you think? How long should it take to do certain things? We've narrowed it down to roughly, I think the train of thought is you want to narrow it down to 7 questions. I also suggested to folks that, hey, if you can get scale information on the scale of 1 to 10, so much better than 1 to 5. Or even if someone has to move a happy pace along a continuum, doesn't matter, but capturing that information is the key thing. Once you capture that information, once you identify what's important and you have them scale it at those top 7 things, then the next question is, okay, well, where do these pieces fall within the banking business? Are 3 of these retail? Are all of them retail? And oh, by the way, what is the delta between where we want to be or where we are versus where we want to be? That delta could be based on the CEO or somebody or the COO says, no, we want to be here. It may be based on an industry benchmark. You may decide, hey, you know what, no, we're going to use, like for example, before I came on with Dun & Bradstreet, I decided to join LinkedIn with a number of people from LexisNexis because I wanted to make sure that, hey, in the event that someone wanted to know what our delta is in terms of where we needed to be, I wanted to utilize another firm that was in a similar industry. So I made sure that I befriended in LinkedIn people that were at a similar level so that I could use that. It's in a different industry than what we are utilizing, but still it's important. It's something for me to establish that delta. So when someone asks why we need to have this as a project, I can say, well, it's based on either this benchmark, or it's based on this industry standard, or it's based on whatever that is. So once you go through that, it's agnostic or it's blind to where it is within the organization, but then, so it's higher up, but then you figure out, well, what silos does this fall into? And you can use this to tell you and inform you, well, this is the #1 project. Hey, it fits into your area, and this is why we're going to spend some resources to deal with this. You could get some pushback, but if you highlight to him that you're helping him, he should be amenable to that help. And as long as you make that clear, and again, this is all, it should all be documented. As long as you make that clear, I'm here to help you. We're gonna win together. That marriage should work pretty well for that period of time. And then you kind of course, make sure that you put controls in place. Once you put those solutions in place, hey, you put some controls, you look at it, you monitor it, you make sure that you're delivering it, and he should be happy because he should be getting some resources to address something that he should know is a pain point. Reality is he might not know that it's a pain point. We know that businesses are structured functionally. Rarely are they structured in a process-oriented fashion. And because they move across various functions or various groups, he may not necessarily know that it's a problem. But if you have your data and you say, look, this is a problem. I've got customer data and they say it's important. This is where you are. This is what the customer says you are. There's a delta. He might even be happy that you brought this to light because he might not have known it. So there's a whole, if you pitch it right, appropriately, he should be your best friend. Make sense?
Dwight,
Yeah.
you referenced this being annual. Is that because of your budgeting cycle, the strategy cycle, or just the amount of effort?
I make the pitch that it's an annualized effort. There is, as you probably know, this whole thing about, plan, do, check, act kind of thing, and so you don't have to, you could have a greater frequency. I'm a strong proponent of set your annualized objectives, right? Let's say it's October, November. Go through, do your work, and then see where you are. Probably my cadence is I like every 6 weeks. I think 4 weeks is too little. I think 3 months certainly is, or 2 months, I think that's too far off. So you can check. So I would like to, I think that what makes sense, we have an agile side of the house at Dun & Bradstreet. and I do understand the need to do things quickly. I think that the right way of going about it is you have your annualized things, you try to do those things, but you check periodically and you ask yourself, how are we doing? And if things aren't working, then you make the adjustments, you course correct. If you get to a point where you say, you know what, this just isn't working at all, maybe, just maybe, you have to swap that out and maybe number 5 comes in and you start kicking that off. But I think that's the approach. I think one of the things that folks can sometimes get, they can try to get too cute or too pretty, and they say, oh, we're going to do this, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and I think it can be a jambalaya of things. I think it needs to be a measured approach. I think you should have between 3 to 5 projects each year, and I'm a big fan of execution. Anybody that works with me, they know pretty quick, we're just going to execute. We can hold hands, that's fine, but we are going to execute. And I think that's really the most important thing, is if you're really key on executing, you want to pick a finite number of projects, make sure that you have the resources, make sure you have the right planning, the right people in place, and then execute. Course correct is necessary, but execute. And I think looking at it and kicking it off annually is good, and then having that cadence that you feel comfortable with the course correct or examine, I think that's the way to go. I hope that answers your question. All right, good. Other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. I hope that you found this helpful. I have oftentimes have folks want to reach out to me afterwards, so I will give you my email address, my personal email address if you want to. If you have any further questions, I don't have a problem with that. I literally eat, drink, and sleep Lean Six Sigma. It's and I have for a number of years now. So if anybody wanted to reach me outside of this, my personal email is Dwight, D-W-I-G-H-T, dwight.harris.jr@gmail.com. So I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning of this, very clumsily, of course. But again, that email address is Dwight, D-W-I-G-H-T, .harris, H-A-R-R-I-S, .jr@gmail.com. Shoot me an email. You can join me on LinkedIn. I'm always looking to leverage additional wisdom from folks at other organizations. We learn from each other. This is my way of trying to kind of show you some tools that I utilize, putting some things together that you might not have seen before. Hopefully you guys can take this back, or maybe this kicks off an important set of tools that you can use and incorporate into what you're doing. But I'm certainly always open to helping. So I hope that you guys enjoy that.
Cool, thank you.
I know you had to go going, so I took some pictures.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks. You like it okay?
Yeah.
I
I
appreciate
never
it.
saw that matrix.
You never, yeah.
That would work with any survey. It doesn't have to be external towards the customer. It could be internal.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all one of the things I wanted to do is, is you get these tools and things. This is really kind of like heavy, but that's an invitation for me to practical. So as I started getting into it, wow, I could really, you know what, I could use that, and I did, and I was hoping to, bring it to people and be of value.
The data-driven decisions is underlying theme of a lot of what I did today.
Yeah.
And that brings it home to kind of, okay, this really shows you which one you should do, and what are the very top of the triangle is, okay, if you do this, it might have some negative ramifications, let's make sure we're doing that this way.
That's right, and it may cause you to say, like, for example, like, well, these two projects are kind of like, they almost have the same cost, and maybe from a ranking perspective, they're so close, like the difference, the delta between 2 and 3 is so close, but if we know that If you do 2, it's going to have this negative impact on this other program.
Right.
You choose 3 as instead maybe. And I think that's a good tiebreak, but I wanted to kind of bring that in because one of the things that I've learned, later on going through the whole process is you got to ask the questions. What's the impact that this initiative is going to have? If you don't ask those questions, you could be in a bad situation.
You know, we talked about in the session earlier this morning. We were talking about, well, if you have a strategy and you have a metric, and if you have one person in charge of this metric, another person in charge of that metric, well, they could want to optimize their metric while making the other person's worse.
That's right.
You need to understand what those effects are. And it's very similar to that kind of topic.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, good.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Technology, and that kind of thing. They did something so profound that it blew away